Chile's government shuts down the capital after recording over 2,200 new infections in the last 24 hours. Cuba slams the U.S. government for being placed on a counter-terrorism blacklist. And the Ukrainian parliament passed an anti-corruption bill, opening the door to International Monetary Fund lending. Welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Chile's government ordered a mandatory quarantine for the capital, Santiago, on Wednesday, after 2,260 new infections and 12 deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours.
The most severe measure that I must announce by instruction of the President of the Republic is a total quarantine in Greater Santiago.
Mexico will gradually reactivate its economic, social, and educational activities by zones based on the number of positive cases of COVID-19 in those areas.
This is therefore a reopening plan that we will start on June 1st. Meanwhile, we will have a preparation stage and we will expand from May 18 the essential activities with construction, mining, and transportation manufacturing.
However, the Mexican government announced that states and municipalities will be responsible for deciding when and how to ease lockdown measures.
By lifting the national sanitary measures, it does not mean that the mitigation measures of this epidemic are removed. What it means is that they remain below, and they will be dynamically adapted according to the epidemiological reality, vulnerability, and resolution capacity of the states and of the municipalities.
Venezuela's Prosecutor General has announced that 10 people, including 5 soldiers and a prison director, have been charged with homicide and other crimes in relation to a prison riot that left 47 dead on May 1st, as they allegedly allowed weapons to be brought into the prison.
These officials are currently being brought before a competent court and will be charged with the crimes of complicity in international homicide, attempted murder for those who were obviously left with the regrettable result of being wounded, and abuse of power. For the director of the prison, since he cannot avoid responsibility for the introduction of firearms based on the evidence collected, we are going to charge Carlos Benito Torres Graterol, director of the prison, with being a necessary accomplice in the crime of introducing firearms into prisons.
British news outlet The Canary has published a report where they expose a secretive unit set up by the British government's Foreign Office that aims to support the overthrow of the Venezuelan government. Our correspondent, Paolo Navarrete in London, spoke with the article's author, John McAvoy, about this unit and its supposed purpose.
So this office has never been acknowledged, the existence of which has never been acknowledged by the Foreign Office, by the UK government. It's called the Venezuela Reconstruction Unit. It's headed by John Saville, the former the former UK ambassador to Venezuela between 2014 and 2017. Now, in an official response, the UK government says that this unit, that is never acknowledged, is supposedly to help deal with the political and economic crisis in Venezuela. However, in private communications that we've obtained between the Juan Guaido's UK representative, Vanessa Neumann, and UK officials, we've found that there's some discussion about planning for the sustenance of British business interests in a reconstructed Venezuela. So we get the kind of idea of what Britain's interest in reconstructing Venezuela is there.
El Salvador has entered the most critical week of the COVID-19 pandemic, according to health authorities. This comes as the government of President Nayib Bukele has implemented executive decrees which have been called unconstitutional. We have more in this report.
After being implemented on May 7th, Executive Decree 22, which restricts citizen movement due to the COVID-19 emergency, has been modified by the government of Nayib Bukele in recent days.
Decree 24 has come into effect, which is not a completely different decree from Decree 22, but it hopes to implement some small changes which were necessary, in particular with the issue of transportation, the use of face masks, and the restriction maintained for circulation between municipalities.
Citizen mobility is being scrutinized by at least 810 police checkpoints, where authorities review people's documentation. The new decree restricts mobility through the single identity document, and around 172 people have been arrested since last Thursday.
Those detained have been taken for medical evaluations as they were circulating on days that did not correspond to them, according to Decree 24. The days you can be outside depend on the last number of your document.
The left-wing opposition has criticized these executive decrees, saying they violate the constitutional rights of Salvadorans.
We have agreed that the defense of human rights needs to be at the forefront during this health emergency. We do not believe in coercive force or in forcefully confining people.
Authorities say that the next 15 days are the most dangerous in terms of infections.
We've entered the weeks when transmission will be highest and cases will increase. I want to call on people, let's not look at the quarantine and at social distancing restrictions as a temporary requirement. These will be ongoing measures.
Meanwhile, at national markets, people are divided. Some criticize the measures while others support them.
This is right, because it's for our personal benefit, because people don't understand the danger.
This is not going to end soon. The way things are looking now, it's going to take some time.
Once the executive decree expires on May 21, many expect that the economy will be reactivated, as it has suffered thanks to the pandemic and to the mandatory quarantine, which many allege has violated people's human rights.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. The U.S. State Department's inclusion of the island on its blacklist of countries that it claims do not fully cooperate on counterterrorism. Carlos de Cosio, Director General for the United States at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, tweeted that Cuba is a victim of terrorism and stressed that there is a long history of terrorist acts committed by the U.S. government against the island. He also said there has been complicity of U.S. authorities with individuals and organizations that have organized, financed, and executed such acts from U.S. territory. Cuban authorities have warned that the impact of COVID-19 to the country's economy will affect areas that are essential for the island's development. Let's have a look.
As Cuba continues to show favorable results in its control of the pandemic, gatherings in food markets remain a concern for citizens and authorities.
Constituye todavía una de las principales inquietudes de las autoridades y la sociedad cubana.
I see a very organized QE. People are being supportive because of the crisis. We have to try to be better until the pandemic is over.
According to ministers in their meetings with the president, there are not enough supplies to distribute these goods via the ration card.
COVID-19 arrived to Cuba at a time when the island was going through an economic restructuring plan, following the tightening of the blockade by the United States in the second half of 2019.
It affected three important sectors of the economy. First, the energy sector, as imports of fuels were blocked. Another important sector is the financial one, and the third sector is tourism. During the beginning of 2020, Cuba was going through very hard months precisely because of these measures taken by the government of President Donald Trump.
A solution for Cuban citizens would be the distribution of food via the ration card, a document through which families receive monthly supplies subsidized by the state. Nonetheless, Cuban authorities warned current conditions do not allow it.
Difficulties in the retail sector will be inevitable for at least a couple of months. There are not enough resources to distribute food via the ration card. This is not a viable option. The option is to increase local production.
But the Cuban government has already addressed this issue.
We must not to halt any production, but create temporary reserves if the markets have a high demand. We need to be ready to recover market space when conditions allow.
The novel coronavirus has impacted economies worldwide. In the meantime, Cuba is preparing to continue to transform its economic and social models to protect the life of citizens and share their experience around the world.
Trinidad and Tobago's government will not make adjustments to its outline for the phased reopening of operations, as requested by some members of the private sector. The health minister is pleading with citizens to respect the measures implemented to halt the spread of COVID-19.
This phased reopening, I just want to urge all who are writing me, WhatsApping me, doing everything possible to advocate for the total reopening of the country this week. We have to err on the side of caution. Because I want to ask this question to all those who are advocating to flip a switch. If we flip the switch and you know that your mother, grandmother will die as a result of this, would you be advocating for it?
Dozens of Peruvian doctors and nurses have protested in Lima, demanding the resignation of the country's health minister. Medical workers gathered outside the Guillermo Almenara Hospital in the capital to voice their anger over the lack of personal protective equipment. Protesters demanded the resignation of Health Minister Victor Zamora, as well as the president of the country's public health insurance system, Fiorella Molinelli. As of Wednesday, Peru registers over 2,000 coronavirus deaths, with nearly healthcare professionals among them, while there are more than 1,200 doctors and nurses who contracted the virus.
We are not in the right conditions. Why? Because we don't have the personal protective equipment, and this leads to us getting sick. If we get sick, we have to go into isolation. We are in a very chaotic moment. It is very sad because many workers are dying.
We need them to give us protective equipment for this emergency that we are fighting, and also another problem is that we are already overflowing. There are already many patients. We have 42 patients in priority, 2 in the emergency. We cannot also provide more hospitalization.
In Honduras, the economic crisis is deepening after 2 months of quarantine, and a growing number of people are taking to the streets to demand food. Experts suggest that levels of poverty will rise by 5% as a result of the situation.
More than 2,000 residents of Colonia San Francisco in Tegucigalpa arrived at the Maximiliano Kolbe Church, where leaders of the Libre Party were giving away whole chickens in order to meet the nutritious needs of some Hondurans.
It is a bit difficult because not even in Chamba can you get any, and so we are suffering a lot.
None of our 3 sons are working.
The crisis has begun to economically asphyxiate more than 30% of the population, which dedicates itself to informal commerce and which is now restricted by the closure of the city and the rest of the country as a consequence of the social quarantine for COVID-19.
There are things which, if they don't establish adequate parameters in order to gradually recuperate in an organized manner with a clear lines on behalf of the state, the crisis situation can become explosive as hunger worsens as a consequence.
According to the forecast by economic experts, the levels of poverty, which have nearly risen to 70% of the population, can grow as much as 5% with the crisis, which the country has seen due to the pandemic.
If one grabs an item at a time, without a doubt the figures for poverty, which we will see at the end of this year, will be at least 5% more than what we have currently. This could become 450,000 people living in poverty. At this time, there haven't been measures applied.
Honduran government authorities announced measures to assist some 300,000 families which are without income. But in the cases in which they have given food, the recipients have said that it was not sufficient.
They need to give a cash subsidy because, as you know, we have a lot of necessities to pay for water, for light, to pay the telephone. Imagine that I owe 3 months without light, and we don't know what we are going to do.
Labor laws have not been able to protect more than 150,000 Hondurans who were fired during the recent weeks from factories. Meanwhile, 70% of jobs depend on the survival of tiny and small businesses.
Authorities in Niger said around 75 Boko Haram combatants were killed in the southeast and in neighboring Nigeria. In a statement, the Niger's Defense Ministry said 25 Boko Haram fighters were killed on Monday near the city of Difa, while about 50 were neutralized the same day in Nigeria's Lake Chad region. A vehicle, 4 motorbikes, weapons, ammunition, and various material for military use were also seized. Boko Haram's insurgency has killed more than 36,000 people since it began in northeastern Nigeria in 2009. It has also displaced nearly 2 million people from their homes. COVID-19 has officially infected the entire African continent after Lesotho reported its first positive case on Wednesday, a week after lifting its lockdown. The Ministry of Health says 81 tests were conducted on travelers from South Africa and Saudi Arabia on May 9th. The results were obtained on May 12th, 80 of which were negative. To date, the ministry says 597 samples were sent for testing, 295 are negative and 301 are pending. A number of subscribers to Rwanda's community health insurance have said they have trouble making their contributions due to the economic hardships brought on by COVID-19. Let's have a look.
The people we spoke to were adamant that making the contributions will not be something they will be able to easily do. Usually we're able to make our contributions by May or June, but now there is hardly any work and getting the money is a problem, so we have not yet paid. Paying for Mutuelle now is not possible because getting work is difficult. Maybe after the pandemic has passed. We will do our best to get the money because we need the health coverage. I am yet to make my contribution for the coming fiscal year because I am still covered for the current year, but eventually I will do it because it is important. I am the only person at home, and you can see that I am at the Sehashika hospital because of illness. I will most likely be able to pay in December because of the problems I encountered. Those in the health sector say that even though indeed the coronavirus pandemic has caused many economic problems, there are people who by nature think of making their health insurance contributions only after they fall sick. Subscriptions are still low, taking into account the COVID-19 pandemic that has drawn a lot of attention, resulting in many not even thinking of making their contributions. We urge people to make their contributions early, and we are worried that some will simply wait to get sick to pay for their Mutuelle health coverage. Usually people pay for their community health insurance scheme early, with the Rwanda Social Security Board noting that by the end of the 2018-2019 fiscal year, 23.4% had already paid for their coverage for the following fiscal year. The current state of things, however, has brought much uncertainty. People start making contributions for the coming fiscal year in January, and there are some who have already done that. As for the current fiscal year and contributions in relation to the COVID-19 outbreak, well, by December, most had made their contributions anyway, and very few remained by the time the pandemic started. So by June, July, August, we will have a clearer picture of the sort of impact COVID has had on Mutuelle, which is something we cannot specify at this time. However, our figures indicate that some have already begun to make their contributions. 2018-2019 saw contributions at a rate of 78.5%, with the current fiscal year contributions at 79.5%, which is an increase of 1%.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Ukrainian parliament has passed a bill preventing insiders from siphoning off international aid and its money through bank bailouts. The anti-corruption bill targets owners of banks that go bankrupt, preventing them from regaining their assets, and is seen as opening the door to International Monetary Fund lending. Ukraine has been in talks with the IMF for months and is expected to receive the total loan of around $5 billion within 18 months. President Volodymyr Zelensky had previously urged MPs to back the bill, warning the post-Soviet country could default on its external debt.
I will say this very simple. I think that during my presidency, and more importantly, during your term, there will be several important historical laws, bills that should unite the whole country, unite all the parties.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with leaders of the new Israeli government to discuss plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. In Jerusalem, Pompeo met with the recently appointed Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz during his first visit abroad amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Apart from discussing Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan, Pompeo and Netanyahu also condemned Iran, accusing it of promoting terrorism during the pandemic. And Pompeo's visit coincided with an upsurge in violence in the occupied West Bank, where Israeli troops shot dead a 15-year-old Palestinian boy in a refugee camp. The funeral for Saeed Kaisia was held at the Al-Fawar refugee camp south of the West Bank town of Hebron. The Israeli military said troops had entered the camp to make arrests and had been met with a violent riot in which shots were heard and a soldier was lightly injured.
The child was watching the army from the rooftop of their home with his sister. I was standing at the door of their house. I heard women screaming, so I rushed upstairs, and I saw the child, a pool of blood, and his sister screaming. I found him dead. The bullet went through the eye and exiting through the back of his head.
Lebanon has ordered a 4-day-long total lockdown starting Wednesday after recording a rise in COVID-19 infections. The country recorded more than 100 new infections over 4 days, but the new cases mostly include repatriated Lebanese nationals who have returned to the country in recent weeks. The country's information minister said the lockdown excludes the health, agriculture, food, and manufacturing industries, but citizens are encouraged to stay home. Shops and restaurants have recently started to reopen after the government last month decided to slowly ease lockdown measures.
The situation is definitely difficult, particularly as things get more expensive. Everything is at minimum 40 to 50% more expensive, if not more. So we're putting up with high expenses, especially because of the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Lebanese pound, because Lebanon imports everything.
I can take a lot of money from my clients. I just can't. I just take a little bit. As much as they can afford, it's okay.
In France, a court has cleared all charges against Cédric Hérault, an olive farmer who helped about 200 migrants cross the border from Italy. Hérault was given a 4-month sentence in 2017, as he also brought migrants to his home and set up a camp. He was also convicted of sheltering some 50 Eritreans in a disused railway building. The Constitutional Council said his actions were not a crime under the principle of fraternity, as enshrined in the country's motto, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity. The court ruled that people cannot be prosecuted for crimes of solidarity. The Chinese city of Wuhan plans to carry out coronavirus tests on its entire 11 million population after new cases emerged for the first time in weeks. Officials in Wuhan have been ordered to submit plans by Tuesday to administer nucleic acid tests on all residents in the city where the new coronavirus first emerged last year. The plan comes after Wuhan reported 6 new cases of COVID-19 for the first time since the city reopened after a 76-day lockdown. And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow health protocols and stay safe. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.